A man was entering a restaurant. He then tries to sit on a chair, but there is an employee removing the chair and this causes him to fall to the floor. The man then asks why she did that and she says he couldn't sit there, because that was a chair for VIP people. He then says he didn't see any demarcation, saying he couldn't sit there, and then the employee says that table was set aside for people who didn't dress like him. He then asks what she was talking about and she says that all the people there were dressed up. The man, Tom, says that he now understands what she was talking about, and then the woman starts to tell him that there are other places they could go and that he should worry about that. The man then says that he wanted to stay there and then says that she was holding a position that she didn't deserve. She says that she was okay with that and that she would serve the man and that he could sit down. He then thanks you and sits down. The clerk then tells the woman that they would have to put the menus back together as they were missing a few things. She then says she would call her vendors so they can have time to set everything up. At that moment the boss arrives and says he has some news for them. He says that day, a very special person would go there. He says that his restaurant was among the best restaurants in town and that's why an evaluator would go there to evaluate it. The woman then asks if they would get paid extra for that, but the boss says no and that they would have to show how good they were at customer service. He tells the two to do their best so that they can win the prize. The employee then asks if they really won't get anything for it and asks what would happen if they didn't win the prize. The boss then says that if they don't do their best and they don't win the prize, they would be fired, as he wanted that prize so badly. He then tells them to get back to work soon. Later, a very elegant man arrives at the restaurant talking on the phone. He says he was going to lunch and that he would return the call shortly. The two then seeing that say they needed to call their boss. The man then says he would call again soon and sits down. Later, the woman arrives with his order. She then says that was the dish he ordered and the wine. The man then says that he didn't like that wine. He says he didn't like sweet wine and drank only dry wine. The woman then says they only had that wine. The man then says he didn't have a problem and thanks the woman. He then starts to eat and the woman asks what the man was thinking of the dish. The man then says that food was very bad. This makes the woman very worried. The man then tells her to leave him alone, as his day was already pretty bad. She then leaves. Later, the man gets a call and he says the restaurant was really bad. He says that despite being highly recommended, he would not go back there. Later, the boss was in front of the restaurant. Another man arrives. He says he wasn't supposed to go into his restaurant as he didn't have any food for him. He then says that he was there to eat and he had the money to pay and that it was not for the boss to judge him that way. The man then says he would get him a table hidden from the others, as he knew that restaurant was too fancy for him. He then calls out to his employee and he promptly responds. The boss then tells his employee to prepare a table away from everyone else for that man, as he was saying he had the money. He then tells his employee to get the money first, because he knew that kind of person. He then tells him to put him at a table away from everyone else. The boss then tells him not to delay, because other people could see that and think something bad about his restaurant. The boss then says that he would be in trouble if the appraiser saw that homeless person inside his restaurant. The employee then takes him to the place that was reserved for him. He says he could sit down and make himself comfortable. He says that was her table and that he could make himself comfortable. The employee then tells him not to leave that place, because he didn't want him to be walking around the place. He says that if his boss saw him walking around the place, his boss would fight him. He says that the man shouldn't be eating there, because that was a very important restaurant, but that his boss told him to serve him, he would serve him. He then says he just wanted to eat something and leave. He then asks the employee to hand him the menu. The employee then laughs and says he wasn't a customer. He says the man didn't have the money to pay for a meal and that he wasn't going to bring him the menu. He then says he would get him something and if he isn't satisfied, he can leave. The man then says that he could bring him something. The employee then leaves. Later, the clerk was complaining about always getting the worst customers. He says that the woman always stayed with the best and says that helping the appraiser would be better than helping the homeless. At that moment the woman arrives and asks why he is complaining. He then says that he always got the worst customers. He says that his boss had told him to help a homeless man who was in the restaurant. He then starts laughing that the homeless man had asked him for the menu. The woman then says that he was complaining about nothing. She says that her customer was very arrogant and that he had said that the food was terrible and that he ended up spitting it out. The employee then says that she doubted he did that, as the appraiser was a very rich man and that she would end up getting a big tip. The woman then tells the man to stop judging others based on their appearance. She says that if the man had come into her restaurant to eat, he probably had the cash to pay. He then asks if the woman felt sorry for the homeless man and asks if she wanted to switch customers with him. He says he wanted to stay with the appraiser because he would tip him big while the homeless man didn't even have the money to pay for the dish. She then says that she wanted to trade with him and the employee agrees. He says that she would take care of the homeless person and he would attend to the appraiser. Meanwhile, the boss was walking around the restaurant when the man calls out to him. The boss then asks what he was doing in the warehouse. He says that he had told his employee to put him somewhere and he had put him there. He then says the food was taking too long. The boss then laughs and says that at least his employee did something right, put him in the right place. The boss then says that the kind of person the man was, he didn't go into his restaurant, but he made an exception. The boss then says that when they are done serving their customers who would really pay and contribute to their growth, they would serve the man. He says the man couldn't complain about anything as he didn't have the money to pay. The man then tells him to stay calm as he would pay for the food. The boss then says that the man would really pay and that if something disappeared from his deposit, he would be searched. He says the man would not leave his restaurant before being searched. The man then tells the boss that he was making a very bad judgment about him. The boss then tells the man to shut up and says that the man had better pay for the food, or he would get in trouble. The man then says that was no way to treat people. Later, the woman takes the man's plate. She says they had put him in a very bad place. He says that wouldn't be a problem as he just wanted to eat and leave. The man then asks if she was supposed to pay in advance so she doesn't get in trouble with her boss. She then says that he could do as he sees fit. Meanwhile, the other man was complaining about the delay. He then says they were taking too long to bring him the check so he would leave. The employee then sees that and is worried. He then says that the man had left without paying. He then says he had to tell his boss and goes looking for him. He then goes to his boss and says he had something to tell him. The boss tells him to talk soon. The employee then says that the appraiser had left without paying. The boss then asks how this could be happening and asks who was responsible for serving the man. The clerk then says it was the woman. He then gets furious and asks to call the woman. The woman then arrives and the boss tells her to explain herself. He asks how a customer could leave without paying. She then says that it was the employee's responsibility as they had switched places. The employee then says that she was lying, but she says that she was telling the truth. The boss then says that he doesn't like excuses. He says that the woman should assume her mistakes and that he would have to pay for it. She then becomes very sad about it. At that moment, the man arrives and asks what was going on there. The boss then says that matter was not for him and tells him to go back to his place. The man then says that the boss didn't understand, but the boss tells him to shut up. The man then says that the man they thought was the appraiser wasn't him. He then says that he was the appraiser. The boss then laughs and says he couldn't be a reviewer for a fancy restaurant like how he dressed like that. The man then says that it was the truth and that he was dressed that way because he wanted to know how they treated people depending on the clothes their customers wore. The boss then says that it was all just a misunderstanding. He says he was just a little stressed and apologizes to the man. He then says that he would place the man at his best table and that he would serve him his best wine. He then tells the man to come with him, but the man says that wasn't necessary as he already had his assessment. He then says it was the worst grade in the entire region. The boss then says that it was all just a misunderstanding and says the man couldn't give him that bill. The man then says he was going to give him a really bad grade because the employee didn't even give him the menu. He says that the employee treated him very badly and that the boss also treated him badly. The man then tells the boss to set a better example for his employees. The boss then says that it was just a misunderstanding. The man then says that the only person who deserved a good grade was the woman. He says that she was the only one who took good care of him and that she didn't judge him because of his clothes. The woman then appreciates the compliment and says that she had only done what she had been taught, not to judge others by their appearance.